There's a moment when you realize you've been trying for a while. Not trying hard, just trying enough. Trying to let the day settle. Trying to keep the tam from tipping. You sit still, shoulders drop a little. Breath goes in, breath goes out. From the outside, it looks calm enough. Inside, something doesn't follow. It's not panic. Not exactly worry. More like a quiet pressure that refuses to name itself. You notice it when nothing is happening. No bad news. No urgent message. No clear reason. And yet the tam doesn't rest. It hovers. Like it's waiting for a cue that never arrives. You tell yourself it's fine. You've done this before. You know how to calm down. That thought lands, and somehow the feeling sharpens. Not louder. Just closer. Your chest tightens by a degree you can't measure. Your jaw holds without being asked. The breath feels supervised. You try to soften it. Gently, politely. And the tam reacts not dramatically, just enough to let you know it noticed. There's a strange intimacy to it. As if the more attention you give, the more present it becomes. You're not thinking about the past. You're not projecting the future. Still, the body doesn't settle into now. Time keeps moving, but you feel slightly out of sync with it. You wonder when this started. Not in a serious way, just a passing curiosity. The question doesn't help. The tam seems to lean forward, as if listening for something else. You catch yourself checking. Am I calmer yet? Is it working? The check itself tightens the space. There's a subtle frustration there, quiet enough to deny, persistent enough to stay. You're not resisting the feeling. At least, it doesn't feel like resistance. It feels more like monitoring. Like keeping watch over something that might change if you look away. Even rest becomes a task. Even ease feels conditional. The room stays the same. Sounds come and go. Your body remains where it is. But inside, the tam keeps adjusting its grip, not holding on, not letting go. Just hovering in between. You're aware of how strange this is. How nothing is wrong, and yet nothing is fully at ease. You don't feel broken. You don't feel unsafe. You just don't feel settled. And the more you notice that, the more the noticing itself becomes part of the weight. Not heavy, just present. As if the tam is saying nothing at all, only staying awake, long after it no longer needs to be. At some point, a quiet doubt appears. Not about the feeling itself, but about the way you've been naming it. You've called it a lot of things. Overthinking. Stress. Anxiety. A personal issue you should have learned to manage by now. Those labels felt useful once. They gave the mind something to hold. Something familiar. But lately, they don't quite fit. Because when you look closely, nothing about this feels excessive. Nothing feels irrational. Nothing feels out of control. It just keeps happening. So a different question starts to form. Not loudly, not all at once. More like a hesitation. What if this isn't something wrong with me? What if it isn't a failure of discipline, or awareness, or effort? What if the problem isn't me at all? That thought lingers longer than expected. You notice how quickly the mind usually turns inward. How fast it looks for a flaw, a weakness, a reason to correct itself. And for the first time, that reflex feels a little misplaced. Because the pattern is consistent. Predictable. Almost precise. It shows up under similar conditions. It responds to certain moves. It intensifies when you do very specific things. That doesn't feel random. So the question shifts again. Instead of asking, why can't I stop this? You start wondering, what is already in motion here? Not who's at fault. Not what label applies. But what process is unfolding, quietly, reliably, every time. You don't have an answer yet. You're not even sure how to phrase the question properly. But something has changed. The pressure to fix yourself eases just a little. And in that small gap, a different kind of curiosity appears. If this isn't a personal defect, if it isn't a psychological glitch, then maybe there's an order underneath. A sequence. A structure that doesn't care about blame. You don't see it yet. But now, you want to. If you slow the moment down, not to change it, not to escape it, just to watch what actually happens, a quiet order begins to show itself. Not all at once, not clearly, but consistently. It always starts with something small enough to ignore. A sensation touches the body, a faint pressure in the chest, a subtle tightening near the eyes. Nothing alarming, nothing that demands action. At this point, there is no problem. There is only contact. Then the TAM leans toward it. Not aggressively, not with fear. Just a slight forward tilt, like attention waking up. This is the first condition. A readiness to adjust. It doesn't arrive as a full sentence. It doesn't say I need to fix this. It feels more like let's steady this. And the moment that readiness appears, the field shifts. Attention narrows. Breath becomes intentional. Muscles receive a quiet instruction to prepare. The sensation notices, not as an enemy, not as a threat. It simply becomes clearer. Clarity feels like movement. Movement feels like change. And change is read as increase. So the TAM responds again. More monitoring. More precision. A finer grip. Still calm on the surface. Still controlled. But something has already crossed a line. The system is no longer resting. It is active. And once active, it begins to organize itself. Each adjustment invites the next. Each response confirms that something important is happening. No panic.
No drama.
Just a steady tightening of attention around a sensation that now feels central. This is where most people believe the feeling starts to go wrong. But if you stay with the order, nothing has gone wrong yet. The sequence is simply unfolding, one condition making space for the next. And it hasn't reached its final shape. Only after all of this does something familiar appear. The sense of me. Not at the beginning. Not before the adjustment. After, once attention has narrowed, once the body has prepared, once the system is already in motion, then a thought settles in: I'm not calm. This isn't working. Something is wrong with me. That sense feels immediate, personal, convincing. But it arrives late. If you trace the sequence carefully, there was sensation before identity, reaction before ownership, signal, adjustment, response, tightening. And only then, a center forms around it. The feeling of I am dealing with this is not the engine of the loop. It is the label placed on top of it. From that moment on, everything feels personal. Effort feels like failure. Awareness feels like pressure. Even calm feels conditional. But the order does not change. Each step continues to arise because the previous one made sense. The attempt to calm down becomes another condition. It signals importance. It signals that this state matters. The system responds accordingly. Not with judgment. With consistency. It tightens because tightening has worked before. It monitors because monitoring once reduced uncertainty. The loop does not ask who you are. It does not need a story. It only needs continuity. And once the sense of me settles onto that continuity, the movement feels owned, even though it never required an owner to begin with. That's why it feels so difficult to step out of. Not because you're trapped, but because the sequence completes itself before you realize you've stepped into it. There is a quiet demand running underneath all of this. Not for calm, for continuity. In ordinary moments, continuity feels like things making sense from one second to the next. A feeling that the day can stand upright, that nothing is about to break apart. When that sense weakens even slightly, the system reacts. Not emotionally, structurally. Something moves in to hold the line. At first, it's barely noticeable. A tightening, a focus, a subtle need for things to stay together. And from that need, something forms. Not because there was already a solid me waiting in the background, but because continuity needs a center, a point that can say, this is still one experience. So the sense of I appears, quietly. After the reaction, not as identity, as function. It's a way to keep the moment from fragmenting. A way to make sure there is still a through line. That's why holding on feels instinctive. Not emotional attachment. Structural attachment. When you try to force calm, the system doesn't hear relief. It hears disruption. An attempt to stop the movement signals that something remains unresolved. That the flow hasn't closed yet. So the system responds. It tightens attention. It sharpens monitoring. It increases precision, not to create suffering, to restore coherence. Every effort to settle becomes another signal. Every attempt to control confirms importance, and importance accelerates the loop. From the inside, it feels like you're fighting yourself, like failing to do something simple. But underneath, no one is failing. The tool you reach for effort, intention, control comes from the same system that's already activated. It can't step outside its own movement. It can only repeat what it knows. This is why willpower never resolves it. Not because you're weak, but because willpower operates inside the loop it's trying to stop. The more sincerely you try to calm down, the more sincerely the system reacts. With more tightening, more urgency, more continuity seeking. Nothing here is malfunctioning. The movement is doing exactly what it was shaped to do: prevent interruption, preserve a sense of still happening. And when this begins to be seen not as an idea, not as insight, but as the lived order of experience, something loosens. Not the loop itself, not the sensation, the belief that you should be able to overpower it. The pressure to fix yourself softens. The blame drains out. What remains is not calm, just less resistance. And in that absence of struggle, the system is no longer being pushed to defend itself. At some point, something loosens. Not suddenly, not dramatically. Nothing gets solved. Thoughts don't stop. The body doesn't fully settle. But the pressure changes. Not because you did something right. Not because you finally figured it out. It shifts because one thing quietly falls away. The assumption that this movement is your fault. There's no moment where you decide to stop blaming yourself. It just isn't there anymore. The thought "I shouldn't feel this way" doesn't show up. Or it does, but without weight. The loop continues to move. But it's no longer carrying accusation. And without accusation, it feels different. Not lighter in the body, lighter in how it's held. The movement is still there. It hasn't been pushed out. It hasn't been resolved. But it's no longer being taken personally. There's no sense of "I need to fix this now." No quiet urgency humming underneath. Just the recognition, wordless, that this is a process, not a mistake. The loop is seen as motion, like breathing, like sound passing through a room. It can exist without being followed. It can be present without becoming a task. Nothing needs to be done with it. Not watched closely. Not corrected. Not completed. It doesn't require attention to keep going. And it doesn't require resistance to end. It simply moves. And because it's no longer framed as "my problem," it stops demanding a response. There's space around it now. Not wide. Just enough. Enough to notice that effort has been resting on top of it all along. And when that effort isn't there, what remains isn't peace. It's neutrality. Experience continues. Sensations shift. Thoughts appear, then leave. But none of it asks for management. No practice begins here. No next step forms. There is nothing to apply. Just the absence of the feeling that something is wrong with you. And in that absence, the system is allowed to move without being pushed or pulled. The weight lifts without being lifted. Life doesn't pause for this moment. The day keeps moving. There are still things to do, places to be, conversations that don't wait. And yet something is different in how it's lived. Thoughts still appear, sometimes quickly, sometimes all at once. But they no longer feel like instructions. They move through awareness the way weather moves through a city, noticed, felt, not obeyed. The body responds to what's in front of it. Hands reach. Feet walk. Words come out when needed. Nothing special is added. There's no sense of managing the inner space anymore. No background effort checking whether things are okay. The loop may still pass through. A familiar tightening. A familiar signal. But it doesn't take over the moment. It's there, and life continues alongside it. Attention isn't pulled inward as much. It rests where the day already is. Sounds arrive and leave. Light shifts across a room. Time moves forward without commentary. There's no need to label any of this as progress. No need to confirm that something has changed. It simply feels possible to continue. not better, not comma, just possible. Thinking still happens. But thinking is no longer the same as being carried away by it. The difference is subtle enough to miss if you're looking for proof, but obvious enough to live with. Nothing needs to be protected here. Nothing needs to be held together. Experience unfolds on its own terms, and you move with it, not ahead, not behind. Just here, as the next moment arrives.